Today we begin our look into human physiology. So we'll kind of start where we started off in anatomy as well and kind of do a comparison look at the differences between anatomy and physiology. So here in physiology, we're going to start to look at the functions of the body itself. And so this is the structural side has now been looked at, and now we need to actually look at the function. How does it do the things that it does? What's the processes behind how a muscle contracts or how a bone builds itself and neurons send signals, etc. All those different things that are happening inside the body to keep us alive, to do the things that we need it to do. How do they actually do those functions themselves? And so we'll look at things from a systemic point of view, and so we'll primarily look at things from one system to the next as we move along, starting out with moving from the cells and the chemistry and moving all the way up to organs and organ systems and everything as we move along. In order to really truly understand physiology, we have to have some other kind of basic principles in mind as well. And so most of them involve physics a little bit. Everything from the pressures that we have in and outside the body to things like electrical currents for muscle and nervous impulses, things like that. Movement of the muscles themselves utilizes physics as well in terms of lever arms and pulleys and things like that as we look at them. So there's a lot of different aspects that come along. A little bit of chemistry in there. Well, truly a lot of chemistry is going on inside the body all the time. That's what's really driving all of the cellular processes that we have. So those different principles now come into play versus anatomy, where anatomy is essentially just kind of where is it and what is it? What does it do? What's the structure that's there? How does it look? How does it compare to the things that are around it? What other things are around it? That's what we did back in anatomy. And so with physiology, we're now looking at more so what's actually going on. We can't really separate the two in terms of anatomy and physiology. The two are really inseparable. And oftentimes we have this kind of idea of complementarity. So in terms of complementarity, essentially the concept is form follows function and function follows form. And so the two of them go back and forth and back and forth, depending upon what function we need a particular part of the body to be able to do. Its form is going to follow that basic principle. And same thing, if we have a particular form, that's all that we're going to be able to do in terms of the function as well. It's going to be dictated by that particular form that is there. So we'll take a brief look at kind of how the body is put together in terms of the different components that we have, and then take a little bit of a look at homeostasis. And so even back in anatomy, you looked at kind of how the body is structurally put together. And so we're going to start with a look at the smallest level of organization, the chemicals. And so we'll look at the chemical level in our chemistry, look at a little bit of biochemistry as well. From those atoms and molecules that we put together, we develop cells. And so cells are then made up of all the different compounds that we have there. Those cells then have the ability to come together and do common jobs. And so those cells are going to then form a tissue. When we put two or more tissues together, we end up getting an organ. And when we put organs that do similar functions, we then have an organ system. And then all of the different organs together make up the entire organism itself. So we have this kind of level of structure that is there going to essentially more and more complex, making our way all the way from the atomic level all the way up to the entire organism. And so when we see that there, we have all of the different processes that are going along within the individual organs and the organ systems themselves. But in the end, it all comes down to that chemical level. How do those particular proteins and lipids and carbohydrates interact with one another in order to do their overall job, which is to basically keep the entire organism or the entire person alive. So a quick look at the organ systems themselves. So we'll begin our look essentially with systems, kind of follow the same pattern here. We have the integumentary system, then we'll look at the skeletal system, muscular system, nervous system, go into further into kind of control of sending signals with the body with our endocrine system, and then delivery through the cardiovascular and lymphatic systems, moving on into respiratory, digestive, urinary, and then finally reproductive. And that's pretty much how we will spend our semester looking at the different systems themselves, and so kind of working our way through them in that way. So a brief little intro into kind of the systems themselves. We have our integumentary system. This system is essentially our way to keep things that are inside us in and those that are outside us out. And so this is our barrier to the outside world. It also helps with other functions, things like making vitamin D, providing for our ability to regulate body temperature, things like that. We have our skeletal system. Skeletal system and muscular system go hand in hand, especially when we're talking about the skeletal muscle system. The skeletal system provides for support for different organs, provides for attachment points, provides for the production of things like red blood cells and white blood cells, all of which is formed inside there. We have storage, both of energy as well as certain minerals that we can store in the bones themselves. Muscles, pretty much think of those as being there for movement, and so they're going to provide some sort of movement within the body itself. As muscles work, as you've all found at some point in your life, when you're using muscles over and over and over again, they tend to heat up, and so we can utilize those as well to generate heat for our body when we need it. Our nervous system and endocrine systems provide for a way for our body to communicate, and so the nervous system is very fast, but it's relatively short-lived in terms of the signal that it sends. It's kind of like turning a light switch on and off. The endocrine system is slower, but much more long-lived. And so its signals are going to be more long-term processes, whereas the nervous system is kind of the moment-to-moment kinds of things. Cardiovascular system is our big delivery system. This is our transportation for the body. This is going to get things moving throughout the body, especially that of the endocrine system, as well as moving things like our nutrients and waste around through the body itself. Outside of the true cardiovascular system, we have the lymphatic system. And that lymphatic system is going to pick up whatever the cardiovascular system kind of dropped off in the tissues and wasn't able to pick back up. It's going to initiate some of our immune responses at times. So it's a big deal in terms of helping our body stay healthy. Respiratory system, all about gas exchange. Get the oxygen in, the carbon dioxide out. From there we have our digestive system. Digestive system is basically a disassembly line as well as absorption. So we're going to break down all that food that we consume. It's going to come into our digestive tract. We're going to break it down into smaller and smaller compounds, things that we can actually absorb, and then get it into the body, into the bloodstream from there, once we find it there. Our body is constantly producing waste. That waste is what we call nitrogenous waste. And so this nitrogenous waste is something that we have to eliminate from the body, and that's where the urinary system comes into play. Urinary system is all about getting rid of nitrogenous wastes, and along the way it's going to control things like water balance in the body, pH, electrolyte balances in the body, all kinds of things that are found in the blood, in the water, that we have to be able to monitor and make sure that we only have so much of it there when we need it. Last up, we have the reproductive system. Reproductive system is therefore primarily reproduction in terms of producing gametes. And so in females, they're going to produce the eggs, and males, they're going to produce sperm. But along the way, they're also an endocrine organ. So they do produce hormones for the body as well. And so those reproductive hormones will also get produced there as well. Not a single one of these systems have the ability to work all on their own. They all require each one another in order to have their normal function. So not a single one is independent of the other. And if we take one of them out, even something that may not seem like it's all that important per se, the lymphatic system even, knock that out, and we're going to start to have problems all throughout the body. So the body systems themselves work along with the individual cells in a particular area in order to maintain homeostasis. And so we're getting to the point where we can maintain basically a level process within the entire body. Nothing is too high, nothing is too low. And so our body systems work on that maintenance of homeostasis, and homeostasis is essential for our survival. And so the cells themselves, individual cells, if something is going off, if something is too elevated or something is too decreased in terms of levels, those cells themselves may end up dying off, which then disrupts the body systems and doesn't allow us to maintain homeostasis. And so this process has to be maintained at all times. And so with that, we have kind of in this process of maintaining homeostasis, the individual cells themselves are surrounded by interstitial fluid. So there's a little bit of fluid that surrounds each one of those cells. Things like our blood vessels are going to come along and deliver nutrients into the tissues, towards those cells. Those cells are producing waste, and that waste is going to have to be picked up by those blood vessels. And so that process is going around and around, and as long as this process occurs normally, they've got enough of the nutrients that they need, they can get rid of all of the waste that they have, we're going to maintain homeostasis at all times. And homeostasis in itself is the ability to maintain a constant internal environment regardless of what's going on the outside. And at the same time, it's also kind of an internal environment regardless of what's going on in the internal environment as well. And so it's not just the outside maintaining things like body temperature, this little lizard here, sunning on a rocks to warm itself up, but also ourselves needing to cool down when we're doing something like a running race. Those types of things, we have to be able to maintain that body temperature. But as we consume things either in excess or in deficiency, we have to be able to maintain that homeostatic balance as well. Otherwise, disease is going to ensue. So in order for homeostatic control to occur, this involves a couple of different things. And so we have to have a couple of different processes kind of working for us. We have to be able to monitor. So we've got to be able to monitor whatever thing that it is that we're looking at. So we need some sort of device to make sure that it's in the normal levels. This is oftentimes a receptor. From there, we have the ability, we need something that's going to not just receive the information about what's there, but then we need to have a processor. And in the body, this processor is generally the central nervous system of some sort. And then from there, we're going to have an effector. And that effector is generally going to be some sort of organ or cells. That's there. And so this process we see in terms of homeostasis kind of all the time. We're trying to maintain a normal set point. And so whether it's summer, whether it's winter, we have our heating and cooling units at our homes and in our businesses and at school and things like that. And we set the thermostat, say, at 72 degrees. And we want it to stay at 72 degrees all the time. If it's summertime and that temperature is set at 72 degrees and the temperature starts to go up, it's getting warmer, it's going to turn on the air conditioner. As the air conditioning works and works and works and the temperature starts to fall below that set point, it then turns it off. Or maybe it gets to that set point exactly and it turns it off. So in this example here, our receptor would be the thermometer. We then have the thermostat itself is our processor. This is where we're processing the information that's there. And then the air conditioning, the AC unit, is our effector. So we turn that on or turn that off based upon those set points that are there. And this is kind of the basic of a normal kind of regulation that we have within the body as well. In order to maintain that, like for cooling in the summertime, we need to have an air conditioner, we need to have a thermostat, and we need to have a blower, something to blow the air on. This is usually your furnace unit in your house. And so all three of those things are needed. You need Freon or some sort of coolant inside the air conditioner. You need electricity and so on. For our bodies, our needs are a little bit different. So we need things like nutrients. And so we need all of the chemicals that we need in order to do the normal chemical processes within our bodies themselves. And so we need things for energy. So we need energy to be able to do the things that we need to in the body. We need other specific chemicals, things like vitamins and minerals, in order to do certain processes in the body. Our energy tends to come from things like carbohydrates, fats, and proteins within the body itself, and so from our diet. We need oxygen, and so oxygen is invaluable to the production of ATP. Without oxygen, we're going to produce a very small amount of ATP, and ATP is what we take those carbohydrates, fats, and proteins and convert them into in the body for energy. We'll talk about that more when we get into the chemistry. The body also needs water. So water is kind of the most abundant substance that we have in our entire body. We're made up almost entirely of water itself. Our cells are filled with water. The outsides of our cells are filled with water. So we need to have lots of water. And it is the universal solvent for all of our chemical reactions that occur in the body. We need to maintain temperature. So our temperature can't go too high, can't go too low. If it goes too high, chemical processes go too quickly. Enzymes may stop working, things like that. If the temperature goes too low, same thing happens. Certain cellular processes slow down too far, certain enzymes don't work anymore, things like that. We've got to maintain that temperature for just the perfect kind of chemical reactions to occur in the body. We need to be able to control atmospheric pressure. So this is essential for breathing. So we've got to be able to raise and lower the pressure inside our chest in order to get our body to move gases in and out of the lungs. So homeostatic control comes down to, with all of those different needs that we have, we've got to be able to make sure that we are able to control them in one way or another. And so we have kind of a couple of different ways that we can control things. We have intrinsic controls, and then we have extrinsic controls. Intrinsic controls occur, in a sense, within an organ itself. This is going to be things that are happening inside one organ. Everything is happening there. Everything from the receptor to the control to the effector, everything happens there. And then we have extrinsic controls. Extrinsic controls are where we have kind of distant processing going on. So something starts to happen out in a faraway organ. It sends signals back towards the nervous system or the endocrine system, and we send out signals either through the nervous or the endocrine system to correct it. And so it's kind of outside of the normal bodies themselves, or outside of the normal organs that we have there. Negative feedback is kind of the most popular in terms of the types of feedback that we use in the body. Negative feedback utilizes a process where when something is going up, we're going to bring it back down. And so essentially, negative feedback is similar to that thermostat, where we're going to move along a particular set point, and things are going to be allowed to go kind of up a little bit, down a little bit, and that's it. We're not going to allow it to go too way far up or too way far down. We're going to keep it in this normal control. So again, we have our receptors, we have our control center, and we have our effectors. That receptor is sending signals back that says something's going up, something's going down, and we're going to maintain that normal process that's there. This negative feedback is utilized the most in the body. And so the majority of all of our systems and organs utilize a negative feedback system. And so this is everything from temperature control to sugar control in the bloodstream, to hormone control in the bloodstream, to hunger. Lots of different processes utilize a negative feedback system, and the majority of them all use that negative feedback, even for respiration. If we are going out and we're exercising, our oxygen demand goes up, our CO2 levels go up, and so we have to breathe more to get us back to a normal, maintained oxygen and carbon dioxide level within the body itself. In addition to that negative feedback, we also have positive feedback. Positive feedback is much rarer. We don't utilize positive feedback very much within the body itself. And so this is not used too often, simply because with positive feedback, basically, as something is going along and then it starts to elevate, positive feedback is going to make it go even further. And so it's going to exacerbate the original stimulus. It's going to make that original stimulus even greater than what it was before. So, and the way really to only stop positive feedback is that we've got to essentially make it come straight back down to zero. And so it's got to get down here to where it comes right back down and it ends the original stimulus. The original stimulus has to be gone. That's there. Positive feedback isn't really homeostatic balance. It's more so related to some sort of kind of emergent type of event, so to speak. So things like blood clotting, things like labor and delivery, and so contractions during labor. Breastfeeding isn't necessarily a emergent type of thing, but there again, the feedback loop uses a positive feedback to ensure that normal amounts of milk are being let down and released during the suckling process itself. So here we have an example of blood clotting. And so when we damage a blood vessel, so we've got our little damaged blood vessel here, that damaged blood vessel, the tissues within the blood vessel release chemicals that send signals that bring about platelets. Those platelets come in and they start to kind of sit inside that clot there, forming. The more that these little structures are here, the more chemicals that they give off. So they give off even more chemicals, which brings in more of those platelets. They bring in more of the clotting cascade that's there. And this keeps on going until we have a blood clot, until there's no more blood coming through that vessel. We've stopped the process altogether. That's there. Or the person has essentially bled and bled and bled and bled, and they've now bled out and essentially they've died. And so with a positive feedback loop, something big has to happen. The same thing goes for, in a sense, kind of labor. And so with childbirth, you have the process where there's pressure being pushed on the cervix. The cervix sends signals up to the brain that says, we've got pressure on us, release more oxytocin. Oxytocin causes the contractions to occur even stronger. The uterus contracts more, pushes more pressure on the cervix. Cervix sends more signals. We get more oxytocin, and the process goes around and around and around until baby's born or mom can't go on anymore. And so the process has to end with something, in a sense, big and climactic happening. We have to stop that initial stimulus in order to break positive feedback. So positive feedback, in a sense, you can utilize for making sure that you get a good grade on that. And so when we're looking at kind of the process, in a sense, through the class itself, and you're looking at your grade and you're looking at what you're looking for in terms of your grade, and you're wanting to be the first in the class, so to speak. As you're in potentially last place, you maybe didn't do so well on your first exam, things like that. You start to pay attention more, you start to do more work, and your grade starts to come up, and slowly you start to creep towards that first place in the class, so to speak. And so that helps you to guide yourself into, well, I need to do this in order to improve my grade. I need to do that in order to improve my grade. And you make those changes and those adjustments until you're up in towards that first place within the class, or up to your A grade that you're looking for. If something disrupts that homeostasis, and so if something causes that process to become disrupted, whether it's a positive feedback loop or whether it's a negative feedback loop, but usually with negative feedback loops, if we can't get things, so if we have our baseline there and we're going up and down and up and down and up and down, and then all of a sudden things start to creep up and up and up, and we can't quite get them down anymore, and they're going up or up or up, further and further and further elevated, this can then lead to pathophysiology. This is going to start to lead to our body having disease. This is going to lead to normal processes no longer being able to function because we've come out of that homeostasis and we've not allowed our body to get back to that set point once again. That can sometimes start to trigger, somewhere along here, positive feedback loops. And so positive feedback loops then start to kick in, and they're going to try and bring that level back down. If they're not successful, then we end up with that illness, that disease, something that is potentially happening there, which may eventually lead to death. And from there, we'll continue on to look at the rest of the body.